Hi friends, Eric again here talking about the things that I'm talking about, which is probably the games that I'm making and other things. Wow, this has to be the smoothest intro I've ever done in my entire life. Anyway, the things I'm talking about. As always, you can buy Virtuous Heaven on Steam, which is my last video game, the last video game that I made, and hopefully not the last video game that I made. I'm doing my best to not have it be the last one. Yeah, it is still available. It has been on sale quite frequently over the last few weeks, but unfortunately, not this week. It will be soon because the 1 year anniversary is coming up in a month and a little bit, May 20th, and obviously it will be discounted then. Anyway, you can still get it anyway, or if you already have bought the game, you can always still write positive Steam reviews. It is still sitting at 11, and maybe having more does something magical on Steam. I don't know. Could be. Could not be. Nobody really knows. We are all just guessing. But yeah, that's something you can do. You can also, curator lists also exists and the game can be put on those if you have them. Just reminders about the various things you can do with video games on various internet platforms. Anyway, let's talk about something that's more fun. Which is JRPG Game, or as it is called actually, because you can download it. If I'm smart, I have a link in the video description. And now I hate myself because I actually have to say it. It's so much more fun to think about it instead of just saying it. But the name of the game is called Lied vom Meeresfall, which is the German pronunciation, which is still wrong because it is actually not spelled like Lied is not spelled like the German word for lead, but like the German word light, which is German for suffering. There are reasons for it. At the moment I said this, it just no, this is good. This is how it's supposed to be. But yeah, you can play the version I've been working on for like the last almost a year now. It has 2 dungeons, a few different ways to end the game, several different boss fights. You can trigger 4 different types of rodents, 3 of which are probably somewhat mean to you. What else is in there? If you can manage, you can turn a boss into a slime, and other things. It is what I find interesting with the feedback that I've gotten so far. Also, mostly from playtesters, but also from the handful of people who've downloaded the game. Not a lot. I published the game a bit on a whim on my birthday a few days ago because I was feeling kind of just nice and thought, why not just do that? Why not just do something, give the world something pleasant in these days? And obviously this game is incredibly pleasant. So one thing I find deeply interesting is that so far from the feedback, a lot of people kind of have not really played much further than the first dungeon, at least legitimately, without enabling debug mode. But they're all kind of positive about what the game's doing and how it's played. But what I find the most fascinating is how so far how widespread the feedback is in terms of ooh, I hate this character, or I really like this character a lot, or when people describe the way they've played the game or the strategies they deploy. Obviously there's some overlap there, but there's also some fairly wide divergence in other parts, and And also like just comparing it to the way how I tend to play through the game, it's just nice to see that there's like actually quite a lot of space for like variation, which is kind of nice. Just nice to see that like this very like problem-oriented approach to like how the battles and the systems and the moves are designed kind of like works in the sense that like people are kind of finding their own solutions to things, or like again not completely unique solutions that given the fact that like specific characters perform specific actions and are more effective at specific actions. There's overlap in approaches, but there's still variation like in the on the margins and other things, so that's kind of cool to see. Yeah, you can just play it. Aside from that, right now I am mostly right now I'm like I'm kind of spinning my wheels because over the last, I don't know, like 2 weeks or something, I've been building the pitch deck for this game, and like writing a budget and building a timeline and all of these things that you have to do when you want money from someone. And that process right now is a bit in a holding pattern because, well, I've given it to someone else and they have to look over it and like, you know, waiting for feedback on like how all of this looks and what I need to improve and right now I'm a bit of a situation where I'm not quite sure what to do. I mean, there are other things I could be doing in my life in general right now, but there's also like this thing of like, okay, where to go next with this game, and that's a bit of a strange situation. Also, like one of the reasons why I'm doing another video is because, well, there you have another hour or like so that you can spend on doing something that gives you the feeling you've accomplished something today. But yeah, so but still, aside from like just mentioning, hey, you can play the game, like one thing I kind of wanted to talk about is because like today like spend a bit more time on just like trying to like figure out like how to actually do a specific thing in the game, or like in the larger project then, and actually did like build out the game, got another spreadsheet, build a system to like handle the data for one of these things, kind of like in preparation of like, okay, once we are like moving towards like building the full thing, what do I need to have in place so that it like I can like quickly go towards like quickly make the things that I want to make. So yeah, let's and there's like one thing I want to talk about because it's kind of interesting and is actually something I kind of like really committed myself to doing only a few weeks ago, and that's this idea of failing forwards. And it's tied to a different thing that is called threats. And these two things are probably what's like mostly what I've like where you can most clearly see the connection of like this project to like indie like tabletop role-playing systems like Powered by the Apocalypse, because those, especially like I'm currently playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and I've have quite a lot of experience with these systems, so like I'm mostly like referring to those, but like there are other game systems that are doing similar things. But like the way this is tied to like the Powered by the Apocalypse stuff is that when you fail a role as a player, the failure you're doing kind of like, or like ideally kind of doesn't cause the story to come to a halt. So for example, you want to climb a wall and you fail the roll, that doesn't mean, oh, you cannot climb the wall and that's it. Instead, like the GMs and the systems around that are built such that like ideally something happens, like still something happens that keeps the story moving forward. And this is something that you don't really have in computer role-playing games. Over the last few weeks, every time I talked about it, people have mentioned Pyre apparently as a game that does this. Haven't played it. it was on a fairly steep discount, so I haven't now. No idea if I'll ever get around to playing it, but maybe. But the idea of and you can, in a way, you can see why, if you like think about something like your regular Final Fantasy type game or a Dragon Quest or something, where the goal is to the big question about the game is, can the player or like the heroes of the game, can they defeat the big evil? And the question there is, like, again, the question is, can they do that? So the entire thing is about, well, can the players get there, and not how can the players get there. And if the question is about can the players get there, obviously when you fail something, in a way, if you like build your game such, if you fail against any challenge there, obviously that then kind of grinds the story to a halt, because, well, you failed at overcoming a challenge. And the way I'm trying to approach this is to like remove the question whether or not the players are actually able to reach the end of the game, towards how are they getting there, which path are they taking to get there. And in a way, you can see this in the playable version you can play, where like at the end of the first dungeon, the game tells you how the larger game will end. It tells you what the party of player characters you're controlling is going to do. So there isn't really, like, for me, this question of like, oh, can they reach the like the final boss or whatever, isn't that interesting. So I'll immediately tell you, yes, you will get there. That's not what the story is about. The story is about like, okay, what happens from the beginning of the game until you reach that point at the end. So and in that sense, you can then, because the reason why I'm thinking about this that much, and it goes back to like something like the stuff I've been I talked about at the beginning of 2025, when I like did like my first attempts of like trying to like figure out the system for all of this. So the reason why I'm thinking that much about it is because it is much more easier to do this idea of like failing forwards in a tabletop game, because you're playing it with other people. And one thing that humans are really good at is improvising. You can just make something up and it happens. Computers are terrible at that. Video games are terrible at that, because, well, you kind of need to have something to like you have to like come up with something on the spot, and that's hard to do in a video game, because, well, they're like very, very static things and deterministic things in the way they operate. So my solution here is to instead kind of like stagger the consequences for losing a battle. Also, like, very broadly speaking, the way I'm treating battles, like, I keep talking about like battles are moments of like dramatic like significance or whatever. Another way how I look at battles in this game is that they're kind of like the equivalent to like dice rolls in the tabletop game. So instead of like treating one battle as a series of dice rolls in that sense, the entire battle kind of is one roll. Obviously, they're like, because it's a turn-based thing, you have like different actions you perform. But in terms of like which outcome matters, the outcome of the battle itself is what kind of like determines of like how the players performed. And in a way, you have like a three-tiered system here that is similar to like a Powered by the Apocalypse system, where you have like a success state where, oh, you won the battle. You have a mixed success state where you won the battle, but a few characters, or like maybe a character like went down to 0 HP. and you have the failure state, which is you lost the battle. And there are different consequences attached to it. For example, like a character going down to 0 HP doesn't mean they're like out of action forever or whatever. They get revived at the end of battle and back at full HP. They even get extra XP when you die in battle. You get bonus XP depending on like if you die in battle and take a lot of damage, you kind of get like bonus XP based on the damage you got when you got killed. So there's like even in a way a benefit to that, but what you do get is like a permanent or like semi-permanent status effect that can have fairly big implications on like how that character acts in a battle, and what they can do and how pleasant it is to control them. Like it's always a bit strange because like I think I had like 2 playtests that like wanted to say that something was bugged when it was just one of these status effects. So there's one status effect, for example, that completely removes the all cursors from the menu and the targeting cursor when you like have a character selected that has that status effect. They're in quotes blind at that moment, and obviously you don't see anything in that moment. You kind of have to like navigate through your actions like without knowing where you exactly are. And there are like other status effects that are all, some of them are actually like useful in certain circumstances, but they're all kind of like take away things from you or like make things slightly more random and things like that. So that's one consequence. Another consequence, and this goes then into this large idea of threats, is that when you lose a battle, this will lead to threats, like overall threats in the game advancing towards like some kind of like conclusion, and which then would trigger further like fictional and like overall systemic consequences. And there are like other ideas that are currently not in the build because it would require an entire game. So I have like ideas for like different epilogue tracks and other things. But like for that, these things to like actually kind of like manifest themselves, the rest of the game has to exist. But they are like again, in another like something another game I keep coming back to as like a reference is the Yogg, where for example you also have things where the ending is clear. The Yogg is gonna come and is going to ruin everything, but the actions you perform in the weeks before that event determine like set up like your character's stats, and then you can pick up like what role are you gonna play when you're like in the rebuilding phase, and that then determines both your character's epilogue and the overall like the town's epilogue or the game's epilogue in general. However, there are also like certain things you can do during the game that will further color your character's epilogue in some way or another. So, and I kind of like want to do something like that, but again, that's very far away. But there are ideas for like in general, like to instead of having like the consequences for failure right at the moment where it happens, I want to take the failure as something that moves on with the player and kind of accumulates and build something out of it. And the funny thing here is that by removing this immediate consequence from failure, the game actually starts to become interested in failure as like a thing that happens. And that's something that not a lot of games are doing, because, well, there's only really one thing that can happen, is you get a game over, or you have to respawn, or you have to like reload your save, or the mission is failed. But it isn't really interested in like the question of like, okay, what happens when you fail? And how does this affect the character? How does this affect the story? And instead it's like a very, in a way, what they all want is to turn the player into a perpetual winner. Because the ideal playthrough, when you like remove all failure states and moments of failure from a playthrough, is, well, they're always winning, and are getting the thing they want. And and we just ignore all these cases and instances where they didn't. And so there's like I think a big space that you can still explore and still do things with. However, there's like obviously obviously the big problem that like it can easily balloon out into like a branching thing of catastrophic proportions. So there's like you have to kind of like be mindful of like how you can deploy it and how you can use it. And again, this is like my where I ended up in is like kind of like rolling them forward and like mostly trying to like carry it with me and do things with that. But yeah, we'll talk about these in a different or like in like maybe like some more like concrete examples of like what currently already exists in the game, because there are already like parts where the game shifts around depending on whether or not you win or lose specific battles. So and that again ties to this whole idea of threats. Threats again is something that is straightly like that I took straight out of like Apocalypse World. And I think like the same like I think they're like in a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games. They're definitely in Stone Top as well. I think they're also in Dungeon World, but they're called fronts there. I haven't read Dungeon World because, you know, one of the creators kind of turned out to not be a good person, and I don't want to buy the book because of that. But again, from what I've seen, it's kind of like a fairly central element of these games, and the way the at least Apocalypse World describes threats is that they're elements of kind of narrative interest. So, for example, like when you build out your setting and you say, oh, there's like a community like further away from where the players are, and they do, I don't know, they're good hunters or whatever, and you could then kind of think about like come up with a question or like, oh, what if like the stuff they're hunting is diminishing in numbers? This could be a threat, because there's like now something that could have larger consequences if it happens. And so you write it down. You say, oh, this is a threat. It is of that nature, and like these things happen should they come to pass. And you kind of plan this out, and you do this for a lot of things. And then when you're playing the game, you kind of have this table of things you can that you can pull in and like put into play and advance and like move like in concert and around the players, so that there's always something around them that is happening, that gestures at the larger world, and like people moving around in them and like trying to advance their own agendas. And what I really like is that this kind of like generates this system where, even though like where like you as a player, and I'm currently in a Stone Top campaign, and and it's fairly obvious there where you cannot really address all of them, and then you kind of like you address something where you feel, oh, this might be like maybe like my character is mostly interested in like fixing this problem, so you fix that problem. And then on the other hand, you have like this other thing that just like keeps bubbling along and getting becoming bigger and bigger, and then suddenly you're kind of like in a situation where you're like trying to plug holes in a sinking ship, and there are just too many of them. So sooner or later, the entire story moves towards some kind of like larger like conclusive moment. That's like at least the ideal state, I think. It's at least how I like thinking about this. And so this, I wanted to put something like like these things into this project, because, and you can see it here now, this gives me elements where I can kind of like adjust parts of the stories around the player. And this is, for example, something, and It's like a very very straight line between like a Powered by the Apocalypse game treatment of a failed roll and here, because one thing that GM can do when a player fails a roll is they can advance a threat, so they can advance it closer towards its ultimate conclusion. And usually what happens when these things are triggered are usually things the players don't want to happen. Though again, it's not required of you that what happens then is bad. You could also like, I keep thinking about like, what if there are positive threats that when they're able to like fire off, they might have like good consequences. But anyway, so you have these, and you have these in the game. And one thing that, for example, happens when you lose a battle is that, well, these threats advance. There are currently only 2 threats in this build, because this is like very for this stuff to really work, you need to have more stuff than is in here as well. And I kind of like wanted to focus more on like the, hey, here's a dungeon here, like you can walk around and do things with. But there are like 2 threats right now in the game. They're completely unrelated. One is related to a boss fight you have to do on the overworld, where the higher the threat clock is, the more encounters are around that fight. And the second one is related to a, in quotes, random encounter you will have in the second dungeon, where the higher that clock is, the lower the HP of that, in quotes, enemy is. You made, like, there's a reason why it's built like that, because, well, the intended outcome, or the in quotes, good outcome of that encounter is that you do not kill that person. However, if the HP is lower, it is more likely for you to accidentally, because, well, it's an encounter, there's an enemy, and usually the random encounters are not nice to you. So there's like this aspect here. And the funny thing here is that the way you deal with that overworld threat can, via secondary aspects, affect how that second thread, like the state of that second thread and the likelihood of you accidentally killing that second encounter. Now, obviously, because everyone is watching these videos and watching all of them, you all now know that you should not attack that encounter in the second dungeon. But if you were to be a naive player and you would lose the fight against that overworld boss, that would then trigger a condition where you have to take a longer route towards your destination, which made me really happy, because it showed how, like, what a good idea I had with, like, the way I set up the whole overworld system, where I can kind of, like, dynamically change the path you can take on it. And, well, if you lose it, like, a different exit from that location is unlocked, which is longer and is gonna tick more clocks. And when you tick more clocks, well, that second encounter will have less HP. Which again then increases the likelihood of you killing them, and then in the larger game, this will then obviously have further consequences, because whether or not that specific character in that encounter survives then has like further, like they would, like, if they were dead, nothing would happen, but if they were to like leave that second dungeon alive, they would continue doing things in the world, most of which you would probably want to happen. So there's like this thing already in place that will continue on when more of the game exists. And you can see here how even though you're kind of like not like, there isn't a typical penalty for failing a battle or losing a battle, there's a consequence for like perpetually losing a battle. One thing I want to be careful here is to not fall into that thing where you kind of end up with and now you're on the bad ending track or the good ending track. I kind of want to make this much more complicated than that. For example, there's like something to be said about like what happens to a person when they always win, right? That's also not healthy. I think you will start to develop some like not very good personality traits and things like that. So I kind of want to make sure, like, and this is like speculative for like the entire arc of the game, but I kind of want to make sure that this all will end up being more complicated than good ending, neutral ending, bad ending, and to have a bit more nuance there, and also again to have to build it such that certain threats might actually, under specific circumstances, might actually be good for you or beneficial for you, depending on where you are on the map and like what you want to do and all that other stuff. But you can also see here how where I think the largest challenge in this game will be is like to like have this structure and then like have all of these separate threads and elements then collide into each other and like create something that is that does something for the player. But yeah, so that's the overall idea. So right now there isn't these are like the threat example right now. Other examples for like consequences in the version you can play is whether or not like mostly like related to like boss fights. So for example, losing the first boss fight just means that character you fought against is still gonna be around, and you might encounter them again if you were to go back into that first dungeon, which you can do. It is immediately available. It has different enemies in it. It is a bit shorter because I felt it wasn't needed to like have you go through the whole thing again. And there's a different boss fight at the end, and that boss fight has two different variations. One where like you didn't defeat the first boss, and one where you did, because well, in one, well, he will be around, and in the other there will be other enemies in there. So that's another variation that's there. And the other part is in the second dungeon whether or not you defeat that boss. Which has, again, you get a different text box at the end. Which, when I think about it, is kind of like everything that different endings in video games do, even though like some of them are presented a bit nicer. But at the end of the day, it's always a different text box, even though it's maybe a nicer cutscene or whatever. In their nature, it's always, yeah, you get either this text box or this combination of text boxes. And that's fine. Right, it's mostly about like creating something that kind of like tracks your own path through it. And I really want, at the end of the day, what I want for this game is to have something where like players start to get interested in like, oh, what happens when I fail here, or like at least are kind of like emotionally neutral towards it, instead of not wanting it, because again, and this is just like from my own experience, again, playing games where things happen when you fail rolls is, sure, very often you don't really want these things to happen, but like sometimes it's really interesting to see what happens when you fail specific rolls and things get out of hand. I think this is hard to do in this way in a video game. I mean, sure, there's this like phrase of like losing is fun with Dwarf Fortress and stuff like that, but like usually people like seem to not like it. And I have like a whole other thing here, and I kind of like want to build something where like over long enough time, people are okay with things maybe sometimes not working out for them. And like instead are curious about like, okay, what happens from here? How will this change? How will this change the rest of what I'm gonna see? And I kind of like want to try my best to shift the focus towards that. And again, that'll I'll be difficult. One thing I do find nice. So again, this decision of like creating a second version of the first dungeon you can go to after you finished it was again a very ad hoc decision, and I managed to build that version within I think 20 minutes, because the game is so, in a lot of ways, so flexible that I was quickly able, like, for example, I didn't have to, like, I can reuse the map, like the entire map. I don't even have to copy it at all. I can just, like, say, yeah, you go back into that, like, in Game Maker terms, room, and all I do in there is, like, make sure that in one place, one exit leads you into a different part of the map, and otherwise all I do is, like, change, like, set flags in the map encounters that determine which types of enemies you're gonna fight, and the sprite. And that was fairly quick to accomplish. This makes me happy in that sense, because here I could see how easy it was for me to introduce variation into everything, right? If it's that quick for me to spin off an alternative version of an entire dungeon, you can see that, like, it would then be probably equally quick to, like, introduce further variation based on, like, the way, again, this whole thread and, like, path through the game stuff that I talked about. So that was just nice to see on my end, that, like, actually, like, obviously it's kind of like extra work, but it's not that much extra work, and it's actually quite easy to pull off without, like, knock on wood, the game falling apart because of, like, you know, contradicting, like, game states and whatever. Who knows how it will look like towards the end when there's a lot more of it in there. But I was fairly encouraged how easy it was to do. But yeah, and then this also obviously then depends on, like, how you want to build it. And another example of, like, of this, and it kind of, like, ties back into, like, both ties back into, like, introducing variation and trying to, like, adjust the game dynamically around the player's action, but also has to do with me not wanting to close doors to players. It is so funny. Yesterday again, I keep going on about evil game design, and yesterday I wrote a blog post about, like, well, maybe we shouldn't make games where everything like orbits around the players all the time, and instead just treat the player as, like, one element of the whole that obviously moves through it, but, like, doesn't have to be at the center of everything all the time. And it's interesting how I, like, wrote this, and at the same time am deeply, like, thinking a lot about, like, okay, if, for example, it is possible to turn a boss into a slime, what do I do with that? If players figure out a way to do that. It is possible. It is possible to figure, like, to weasel yourself into gaining the ability to turn an enemy into a slime. And it is possible to apply that effect on a boss. So there are, like, different things you can do, right? You can be boring and just say, nope, it's not possible to turn enemies into slimes. It is possible for you to say you can turn some enemies into slimes, which is kind of like the thing I'm currently at, but, like, not quite. Because technically it will be possible to turn every enemy into slime. It just, like, for some it will be, like, next to impossible to do, but theoretically still possible. And they're like, and obviously you can just say, yep, you can do that. In a way, again, I'm kind of, like, in the yes, you can do that camp, though, with variation of, like, yeah, well, with some it's going to be harder to do, just because they're, like, more resistant to, like, status effects in general. And then the question is, if you can turn a boss into a slime, what happens? The reason I like started thinking about it is because at some point I noticed, wait a second, the second boss is completely vulnerable to status effects. The slime transformation thing, which is actually just a move that like a different type of anime has that like switches between two states. So that slime transformation thing, and in a similar way a crystal transformation thing, because that's the two abilities that exist for that specific enemy or two enemies, can be applied to the boss. First moment of curiosity was like, I wonder what happens. So I cheated myself some slime turning items and tried it out and saw, yup, the boss turned into slime, into like the regular slime enemy, the possessive sludge, with the amount of HP of the boss. But like the rest of the stats and the attacks was, well, it turned into possessive sludge. So it did the things that possessive sludge does, which isn't a lot. It also, and that was the funny part, triggered the story flag for you lost the battle, because the boss died, like was destroyed in Game Maker terms, with more than 0 HP, and that then set the story flag for like you died against the boss or lost the fight. So I had to do something there, and then I was thinking, wait a second, what if this is kind of like if a player were to figure out a consistent way of like gaining the ability to turn enemies into slimes, and were to turn every boss where it's possible into a slime. Like imagine someone's like very single-mindedly just does this all the time. Isn't it a bit boring when the enemy that's generated is always the possessive sludge? Wouldn't it be more interesting if a player discovers this, and not only will they turn a boss into slime, but they will generate a specific boss slime instead? And again, my mind then went to, oh god, how much work could this be? But thankfully, I've built this game such that it is actually quite easy to dynamically generate an enemy, because all the attacks are just in one giant spreadsheet. So what happens now is you turn this boss into a slime. It generates a boss slime. This boss slime has base stats that are then adjusted based on the level of the boss you've turned into a slime. It will take the HP of that boss and the moves that it has, and here's where it gets strange and potentially weird. So, as I said, it's a spreadsheet. So, right. So the base the base moves are going to be calculated like this, and I can actually, that's the good part of like having it in domino. So let's just imagine a boss. The boss has like, I don't know, violence, which is the basic attack, and then I don't know, invoke materialism. That's a different thing. Let's just also give it the aura of civility for maximum something. It can be anything. These are like moves that exist in the game. This is boss A. Boss A. We then turn it into a slime. Gets turned into slime. So here we have the slime boss, which is called a Schleim, which is not how you would spell Schleim in German, but who cares? Also, if you play 10 Battles to Destiny, the slimes there are spelled similarly. Anyway. Do not get distracted. So, we have this. This boss will then generate its moves. It will not just take these three. That's boring. What it will do, it will take these three moves, and then it will look at where it is in the world. Which, like, overworld location is it in? and where on the specific map is it. It will kind of do what one of your party members does, like who has a move called World Magic, where like depending on where she is, she has a different ability that is based on the number, like on the spreadsheet number. It generates a number and then it looks like, okay, where in the spreadsheet are we? You have this ability. What the Schleim does is similar in that it takes like these 3 moves and then generates a number kind of like in range around these moves based on the location and other things. So you will end up with a boss and location specific Schleim boss that you can generate. And that just happens. No matter where you do it, no matter which boss you turn into a Schleim, it will always create something. And it is not completely randomized. It is kind of based on the thing you've turned in, you morphed into this blob. And depending on what you morphed, it is possible that this fight is much easier because who knows, maybe you generated a boss who has absolutely no offensive capabilities whatsoever. You can also generate something that just murders you. For example, I think the pacifist, if you like the boss of the second dungeon, if you do that, I think it has one move that can just kill you, if I remember correctly. Again, it's it's kind of funny, but like what I like here is that it like generates this. It both addresses something that the players can do, and it kind of like runs with it. There's like this idea of like, I don't know where it is. I think it comes from like improvisation at theater, but like who knows? Like of like yes and no but. So like when someone says something, you can say yes and X, Y, and Z, or no but this other thing. So that you can kind of like always have things rolling around, I think. What I'm trying to do with these instances, as best as I can, obviously, it's like, again, video games can't improvise. I kind of can only address these things when I notice them and can find a way to make something constructive out of them. But it's not really a yes and, it's more like a yes, but. So, yes, you can turn a boss into a slime, but you might not want to do that. or maybe you want. And obviously then there comes this other part of like, okay, how do you then deal with people who turn every boss into a slime? What happens then? Right? Because this is also something that is then on the table. And in these instances, I kind of always want to try and like put something in there for people who do this. It won't be a lot of them, but just like from a player's perspective, imagine like you get an idea of like, oh, does this, can I do this? Like, can I do this very strange thing? It's a bit in like, again, like to go to a game that sometimes does it, but like unfortunately not always. In Final Fantasy V, again with blue magic, you have abilities where in theory you can adjust every enemy's level in the game such that you can kill them outright. Or like not with all of them, but like with a lot of them. It is like the boss at the end of the second act of the game can be killed that way. It is a bit hard to do, and it depends on timing, on like amount of ATB takes and stuff like that. I've done it a few times, but it's again it's a bit complicated to accomplish. But like imagine you're like someone who just plays the game and doesn't really know anything of what's possible, but realizes, wait a second, I have ability A and I have ability B. Is it possible to combine these? And what happens? And then you do it and you pull it off and you actually get it to work. and the game kind of like says, yes, you can do it, congratulations. I think these moments are just nice, and if you and I already have a game that allows you to do a lot of strange things if you can figure it out how to do it. So it would feel strange in this instances and also other instances to then say, no, you have to fight this boss. You cannot turn it into a slime. Shame on you for even trying. No, if you already like set things up like that, you kind of have to address it and kind of have to like let things go in this moment. Because there are like more than enough other instances where again, and then you can do the fun thing of like thinking, okay, like how can I address this if players are excessive? Will at some point like an incredibly evil slime show up? Will the slime get worse and worse the more often you do it? What happens if you could turn the final boss into a slime? I don't know. I honestly don't know. With the way the rules of the game are set up, it's probably gonna be possible. So I have to think about this. But there are also like a lot of different ideas that oh god, there's one ability in this game already. Don't be surprised if you find it and use it and the game just closes down. That's intentional right now. I think you will understand if you read the description. But yeah, so this is where I currently am a little bit. What you can maybe see here, and this goes back to like everything I've done over the last few months, or like something I've said a lot, is it is so much fun to work on this. Because of this, on one hand, but also because and this goes back to like what I like the blog post I wrote yesterday, is I don't think about the players. I mean, I do think about the players. I just spent, I don't know, 20 minutes talking about this. But I don't think about how they're gonna feel when they play it, like moment to moment. I'm not thinking about an element and then get concerned, oh god, what if this is frustrating? That's like, whatever. That's not really, like, for me, like, there are other things that are more important. The player is then the element that kind of like, I described it yesterday, but in general, like, the player is, like, for me, in this game specifically, but like, maybe even broadly, is like an agent of chaos. You have like a space with like elements that are floating around it, and then the player comes from outside and moves through it. And through their path is influencing all the other elements around it and like rearranges them. And like sometimes another element from the game like is in the player's path and they collide and the player explodes. Which in this instance would mean they would stop playing the game, I guess. But it would still like create something, right? And it is like, it happens. And the important part here is like, it is not built such that like on the player's path, they're gonna like capture every other element in the game, which will then start to like orbit around them. That's not my goal, and this is how I'm trying to like think about this. That what I want is for the player to be a part of it, but to not be the central part of it all, but like to be a contributor to something. To like kind of like a very strange collaborative effort, because I'm setting all of this up, right? Me as a designer, or like game designers, or like people who make like very broadly speaking, everyone who makes games or is involved in the process, are like building something and setting up a thing, setting up this space, and the player is then the element that sets all of it in motion. And it's a collaborative effort, because you need the people who set everything up, and you need to have the element that starts the movement. Yeah, so that's like how I'm trying to think about it. And again, this goes back to like this whole idea of like with the threat system, where I want to have actors in the world that are doing their things outside of the player's control. Some of the threats that I'm gonna put in this game you will not be able to touch or stop them, because they're being controlled by actors that are like completely outside your sphere of influence. This is just something that is gonna happen. You might be able to control when it's gonna happen and the intensity of it all, but you will not really be able to prevent it from happening. And that's I think that's important to like set things up like that, and to really, instead of like again setting everything up that everything always has to be like furthering the player's interests, to like sometimes build things that might go against their interest. Because again, building it like such also means that like sometimes you have something that it's a push and pull. This game has a mouse in it that murders you, but it also gives you the ability to turn any boss in the game into slime. So there are two sides of it. You cannot have the murder mouse without the slime turning, I guess. At least for me, it's important to kind of like have the pendulum swing in both directions with like equal intensity. And it is my idea, or like, now I'm thinking again about dungeon encounters, obviously. In dungeon encounters, you can go into depth and be turned into a hamster and like be eaten by a black hole, and whatever else can happen to you. But it also gives you a weapon that has a damage multiplier that's based on like where on the map you are. Or you have like a character who can equip weapons that let you eat any enemy in the game. So again, the pendulum swings in both directions in this instance, and I think this is important, because I feel this is like where, and in a way you sometimes have to think about like, okay, when does it get too frustrating? Again, what's important for me is to build something where then people are interested in seeing what happens when they fail at something, and to generally build something where people are mostly just interested in seeing where it goes and what happens, and just be much more like. And in that instance, the moment you're more interested in like to seeing what happens, you're also like much more okay with losing sometimes. At least that's where I am. It's yeah. Anyway, wow, I did manage to talk an hour. Great. Yeah, you can play this now. It takes me around like the playable build takes me around like 1 hour and 20. So far what I've heard is like, well, somewhere between 2 and 4 hours or something, which is interesting. I don't know what these people are doing. Are they fighting all encounters? I don't know. I think it's mostly about like the thinking process during battles. But who knows? Yeah, you can play it. It would be cool if you like, again, just take a look and see what happens. I am planning on at some point doing a live stream where where like my goal is to legitimately turn the boss in the second dungeon into a slime. Legitimately meaning using the game's the game's own systems to get the ability instead of giving it to me at the beginning of a test session. That's what I want to do, because it is possible. The problem is, well, it's a bit involved. I might have to do some math to kind of like build a route, or like build myself a script of like, okay, you have to do these steps and hope that it works. But yeah, this will happen at some point, maybe next week or so. We'll have to see. But yeah. Do all of these things, like play the game, read my blogs and email newsletters, and buy Virtuous Heaven and be nice about it on Steam and elsewhere. Aside from that, I hope you have a good time, a good week, and may the world be better than it is today when we next speak. Anyway, see you around, everyone. Goodbye.